How's everybody doing? Hoping you're having a fantastic day. So, Ethan has finally decided that he's not quitting. Originally, he put in his 2 weeks notice on this on this series because I know I literally promised them multiple times, like, oh, next week Ethan's going to be back here, and then I promised him again next week Ethan's going to be back, and Ethan decided that he had to, like, people decided they wanted to, like, stab each other. Ethan, okay, that's okay. Out of context, I don't know if we've talked about this on the stream before. You do crime scene cleanup, so Ethan, people decided to stab each other, so Ethan had to clean up crime scenes. So yeah, it
Yep.
is what it is. But
Yeah.
Ethan, would you like to lament and apologize to everybody for your tardiness to every single one of these episodes?
No.
That
Well, I am glad to be back. That's certainly what we could say. And I am having a fantastic day as you start all of your intros, by the way.
I do. I don't even know where I got that from. I kind of
I
just
don't
started
either.
saying it.
It's kind of weird.
Kind of just started saying it, and then eventually it became a thing. But today, what are we talking about today? Because today's a groundbreaking episode, because we've spent, how long have we been doing this, Ethan? Like 3 or 4 months, right?
Probably longer.
Probably
Say
longer
like
than that.
April. I don't know.
I don't know. A lot of months. We've been spending months on, like, intro matters. I think we're like 12 episodes in at this point. We're talking about the notions of everything. We're talking about, like, the divisions and the definitions of everything. Now we're going to actually get into talking about the possibility of revelation. Isn't that fantastic, Ethan?
It is. It's a beautiful thing. We get to attack some rationalists.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So the way that this section's going to go is, today we're going to tell you all about something called naturalism. And naturalism is basically the said to be the remote root of all of these issues that people are going to have. You have, on the one hand, pseudo supernaturalism, which we kind of fought. We're going to be fighting here coming soon. But on the other hand, the other opposed error is naturalism, which is basically denying the supernatural order. Although we're going to get into it in obviously more detail than that. So from here, we're going to look at all of the different ways that one could be a rationalist, which is naturalism's effect on the intellect. We're looking at all the ways somebody could be a naturalist, from the part of the subject, from the part of the object, blah, 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 blah. All of those ways that somebody could possibly justify their denial of the supernatural order. And we're going to show that it's stupid. Basically, really, we're going to show that there's somehow an incoherency that occurs in all of these systems. Anything to say that, Ethan?
No, not really. I mean, I think everything you said is self-evident. I'll just judge you from on high.
Yeah, you're synthetically judging, and I'm over here with my little analytic brain, but you're synthetic.
Yeah.
So today we're just going to be going over what naturalism is in general, specifically rationalism. Although, again, we'll explain to you exactly what those mean. So first, when it comes to the definition of rationalism, this is what Garrigou does in the first section. The definition of rationalism is basically that human reason is the principal norm. So the human reason has some sort of autonomy. Really, it's the human intellect is free in an absolute sense, free from any sort of restriction of being informed by divine revelation or being controlled by anybody else. The human intellect is just completely free. That's what rationalism is. Rationalism thinks that there's no sort of supernatural order which is above us, who is able to bind our intellects to believe some sort of bind our intellects to some sort of truth. So, anything you want to say about the definition in general, Ethan, or can we move on from that?
No, I just want to briefly comment on just how prevalent this is. I was telling Christian before, I was just watching watching Elon Musk's interview with Lex Friedman on his podcast the other day, and you see you hear them say like several times, like they judge everything through physics, as if that's like the ground by which they understand everything else, and that's naturalism as to its nature. Really, it's like judge everything, even higher things, through lower things, and deny that the higher things exist, and that's exactly where they're coming from. So you'll see these ideas everywhere you go, whether or not you explicitly recognize them. But especially after you read through these chapters, and in the next one as well on pantheistic evolutionism, you'll see these concepts all over the place, and they're often mixed together and intertwined, and people don't even realize they're holding them. So
Yeah, that's interesting what you said, judging the highest things by the lowest. Because what we're going to see is the reason that Garrigou and the church freaked out about modernism, which is we're going to find out it's going to be a form of this rationalism, or really a form of trying to bring rationalism into union with Catholicism. The reason that the church is going to freak out so much about naturalism, and about especially rationalism, is because rationalism is going to be judging the highest by the lowest. What is that the exact inverse of, Ethan?
what I was doing and judging everything you were saying from the highest principles.
Exactly. You judge what wisdom is, and
Yes.
Ethan is just defining wisdom for us.
Just
But,
in a
yeah, he's
silly
showing
way.
Yeah, in a silly way. But what? Gosh, you got me sidetracked, you jerk. But when
I have
it
to do
comes
that at
to
least once an episode.
you have to. But when it comes to the church's freak out about naturalism and rationalism and its various forms of semi-rationalism, rationalism, modernism, pantheistic evolutionism, all blah 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 blah, all this stuff we'll be talking about. The reason the church freaks out about it so much is it's literally the inverse of wisdom. It's like anti-wisdom. It really is like the sort of synthesis of foolishness.
The fool has said in his heart, there is no God.
Exactly. The fool judges the highest things by the lowest principles. So the fool is judging the supernatural order by the natural order. But what I'm wondering is, when it comes to most people that we would like identify as rationalists, do you think that it's a principled rationalism? Because a lot of the various different ideologies we'll be covering, they're principled rationalists. They say it's impossible due to certain principles of reason for there to be a supernatural order. And then other people are kind of just practical rationalists, where they'll say, well, I guess it could be possible that this occurs, but I just don't think that it has occurred, so I'm just not going to even discuss it. Like, which one do you think it is for a lot of these people?
I don't think I've ever come across very many strictly principled rationalists. I think most of the time they kind of don't explicitly deny anything. They just don't recognize what they're holding. They maybe don't recognize the value of knowledge and recognize how we can know causes and effects well, and they just end up kind of groping around in the dark, and get lost in their passions and can't find truth.
Yeah,
I think
we're in
that's
like a weird like post rationalist sort of environment, where before, I mean, people were they still had like the brakes, I guess, on, where they still admitted the existence of God. They basically tried to agree with us on everything when it came to the natural order. So they were literally just denying the supernatural order. But now we're kind of at a point where people not only deny the supernatural order, they also, like, weirdly enough, deny simple things about the natural order. When it comes to the first principles of reason and moral action, when it comes to the existence of God and things like this. So it's almost as if like we're taking like two steps back now, in all of our discussions. Is really, it's more rare to meet a pantheistic evolutionist, or a transcendental idealist, or like all of these, or like an actual agnostic, which idealists are not, are agnostics, but whatever. it's really insanely difficult to meet these type of people because they just don't really exist anymore, because people have just kind of taken it even a step further, just by not only denying the possibility of the supernatural order, they don't think there's a natural order either. Because
Hmm.
if we remember from the episode on the natural order, when you think about what the natural order is, the natural order assumes God creating under the aspect of his under the aspect of creator, creating under the aspect of creator, and then leading us to himself, and him as our end under that same aspect. So we have our sort of natural beatitude, and in God as creator is where that's where the natural order starts and finishes. So really, with people in our day, they don't even like affirm a natural order. So we're kind of like an entire step back when it comes to stuff. It's really interesting. I don't know if that has any merit, Ethan, or if you ever thought about that.
No, it certainly does. I think, yeah, when you were saying that, it made me think of another book by Garrigou. What is it? I think it's called The Order of Things. He's writing on the
Mhm.
principle of finality, um, and that's really one of the biggest problems is in this era. At least the rationalists would have posited like ends for why the human exists, although very weak ones, and he would just define man according to his own kind of desires, and
Yeah,
everything's judged by human reason. But today, I'd say people don't even have a concept of an end to to think about most of the time. They're just kind of floating around between various things and aren't able to set themselves on one thing, um, and think about the goal of their existence. For example, you ask a question like that, and people look at you like you're an alien.
yeah.
Um,
It's super interesting because it's like modernity has almost become a um, a like reductio ad absurdum to like all of the silly ideologies of those of that era. It's like they're literally just taking it to its conclusion, just saying, okay, well, I guess there is no end. Then
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess we just do whatever we want, kind of. So yeah, it's really interesting to kind of see like the sort of play of the intellect, saying, "Hey, the intellectuals, the Catholic intellectuals, saying that this stuff was going to come from um, modernism, like modernism. The end of modernism is atheism." And then, of course, back then people were like, "What are you talking about? We believe in the existence of God." Like that's just silly to say that that's going to happen. It's like, well, kind of, it
Yeah, I
happened.
look at it now.
But yeah, it's almost like we see before our eyes the reductio ad absurdum happening, like in real life, just before our eyes, just the blow up occurring, where all of these principles they started from a small error in the beginning, and they
Hmm.
just brought it out into like these massive consequences in the future. And this kind of sounds like the whole like filioque caused atheism stuff, but we actually have like a reasonable account for how all of this stuff is drawn out from principle to conclusions. But it's very fascinating to watch. It's very unfortunate, but looking at this stuff actually does help us as apologists when we're considering how to deal with people with where they are intellectually, even though they may not realize where they are intellectually, because they have a bunch of principles that they don't even realize that they have, that were imbued in them by their education from their education, their parents, even,
Hmm.
and just their general environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think what will become clearer and clearer as we look at rationalism and then pantheistic evolutionism, which is in all these naturalistic ideas as we go through, just how wise it is to affirm the supernatural order in the true sense. Like we can really look at um, all of these ideas and see where exactly they go wrong and correct them. That's not the same thing as you know correcting every individual person who holds these things. There's more often than not it's a moral issue rather than an intellectual one.
Yeah,
But
what I'm struck by is something that Garrigou is going to bring up later, and this is something that's all over St. Thomas, is the moral necessity of the revelation of the natural truth of natural truths.
yes.
Is yeah, because a lot of times, even in like a state of pure nature, without like certain super added preternatural perfections of the intellect. It still takes a long time, and it still takes like quite a bit of brain power to come up with a lot of these even naturally available truths. Um, as St. Thomas says in a different place, as we descend to particulars, things get less clear.
Hmm.
So, like when it comes to like universal principles, yeah, it's a little more clear. But once you start descending into particular occasions, things begin to get less clear. So, this is why uh, I hate to make this connection because I always make this connection, but like the sort of questions surrounding the marital use. When it comes to the questions surrounding the marital use, these are not extremely clear, at least to us, to people of our age. It's not actually extremely clear. But what helps us is the authority of the church, the authority of her theologians, all of these of a sort of higher order, which are working upon and bringing to bear these natural truths. It actually helps us figure it out. Another example would be like polygamy. Polygamy, it's actually kind of difficult from nature to know that. Um, According to natural law, one ought to have a single spouse. One ought to have a single wife. It's there's certain circumstances where naturally it was permitted, of course, to have multiple wives. And that's a whole like debate right there over the specific nature of that permission. Um, but it's not exactly clear from nature that this is a thing. And we needed, thanks be to God, we needed the second person of the Trinity to come down and tell us that from the beginning they were created husband and wife. Like you guys don't have this whole thing with a bunch of different wives. And then what's interesting is looking back on it, like when you read Summa Contra Gentiles, for example, where St. Thomas is talking about the reasons, the natural reasons why polygamy is not a good thing. You see that Christianized reason working within the natural order is actually due to being given the answer by supernatural revelation, is able to seek reasons for these things from nature, and is able to rationally defend what was revealed to them. So that's the way in which the natural and supernatural orders work together when it comes to natural truths. It isn't like this sort of like separated blocks. They kind of go back and forth and are dynamically working within and through one another. And naturalism is just eventually, because it doesn't have that safeguarding of supernatural revelation, it's eventually just going to drop the natural order. And that's what we see to today. Once you lose this principle of supernatural revelation, teaching you those morally necessary natural truths, people just kind of give up on them. And that's what we're seeing.
I hope this isn't too complicated where I'm going with this. It just always goes back to our conversations when we were converting about the uh, grace being superadded in the garden, how
Yeah.
original justice with the gifts of sanctity and integrity kept everything that was lower in man subject to what was higher.
Yep.
Once that's lost, like notice the best example of it in the loss of the supernatural order causes, or the loss of grace causes the soul to be dead, just like how in the natural order, I mean, it's not even, you know what I'm saying here. When somebody loses their soul is separated from their body, also known as dying. Their body disintegrates, like it becomes nothing. That's exactly what's going on here. The sort of the quasi form of the natural order is to be put into grace, that it would be like enlivened by grace and be able to seek the supernatural end for which it exists.
Mhm. Mhm.
And once it loses that, even the natural order begins to disintegrate, and that's what we see with rationalists today. I mean, they've just, even their ideas are disappearing and they're being spread out into nothingness.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So this is actually has it actually goes very well into the second and third section, because in the second section um, we look at what the foundation of rationalism is, like what is sort of intellectual foundation for making this judgment. So the proximate foundation is naturalism. So naturalism is basically going to be a sole affirmation of the natural order and a denial of the supernatural order. And by denial of the supernatural order, um, this can be in two ways. So the first way is a denial of the existence of these truths. So this can happen on the part of the object. So on the part of the object, there is no supernatural order. This is either atheism, because it denies that there is anything supernatural, or pantheism, which kind of brings down the supernatural into us, because pantheism, God becomes everything. Or on the part of the subject, so on the part of our intellects, and this is agnosticism, because there's a sort of lack of the knowability of these truths. And what Garrigue is going to bring up in the third section. The third section is honestly one of my favorite in the entire book. The third section definitely needs to be read and reread and reread, because what Garrigue does here is he looks at this principle of naturalism, so the denial of the supernatural order, and he says, okay, just as, so on the one hand, if you guys out there are not familiar with what's called the supernatural organism, you guys need to familiarize yourself with it. I think I might have a video on the supernatural organism. Let me check. It's very, very important for understanding a lot of very important things. Supernatural organism. Let's see, Scholastic Answers. If not, there it is. So 1 month ago, a 7-minute video. What is the supernatural organism clip? Okay, so if you don't know about the supernatural organism, very important that you learn about it. But basically, the supernatural organism, we have this sort of remote principle, which is grace, and it works in throughout all of our faculties, and it even works throughout the supernatural society of the church, and even has certain effects on such things as the natural society, the political society, where grace is going to flow over into there, obviously not changing its end to, not changing its species into something supernatural, because that would be that'd be like a pseudo supernaturalism, but rather it sort of redirects it to a different end, retaining the same formal object, kind of like how Christian chastity retains the same sort of species as natural chastity. It's just under a higher light with a better source, and then ordered to a better object, ordered to a better end, although with the same formal object. It doesn't change species, but you have grace working throughout all of the sort of aspects of us in that way. And on the other hand, when it comes to naturalism is the same way. So naturalism works itself out. That is, the denial of the supernatural order works itself out into all of our various faculties. And he has this just fantastic quote on this. So he says, indeed, just as naturalism represents the denial of our elevation to the supernatural order, and rationalism the denial of revelation, so does liberalism represent the denial of the duty to accept divine revelation, either for the individual or at least for the society. And thus liberalism, which holds that faith is not necessary for salvation, substitutes itself for Christian obedience, just as rationalism substitutes itself for faith. Similarly, humanitarianism, that is the love of humanity without any relation to subjection to God, substitutes itself for charity, by which we love our neighbors for God's sake. Nay, in humanitarianism, the order of charity is inverted. For as the defenders say, we must reveal all human opinions, even if they are contrary to the word of God, which is to scorn God himself. Hence, according to the church, this human respect, which is often called modesty, represents the falsest form of humility. The church, thus, liberalism and humanitarianism are false forms of charity, mere imitations, like glass beads in comparison to a real diamond. Similarly, in humanitarianism, the desire for earthly felicity is substituted for the hope of heavenly beatitude. Likewise, as regards our sense, desires, sensualism, effeminacy, and the legitimacy of divorce are substituted for mortification, chastity, patience, and Christian fortitude. Finally, as regards society as whole, socialism is subjected for the reign of God in society and for Christian justice. as though society itself, not God, had established the particular rights and duties regarding familial and social life, and as though man's end were not heavenly beatitude, but rather a future earthly city. Hence, socialists speak of society with a mystical lift in their voices, as though they were speaking of God, for in their eyes, society is indeed God in the very process of his self-becoming. And he has this that fantastic quote, and then he has this chart where he kind of lays it all out for us. So we see right here, so we have naturalism on this side, grace on this side, rationalism substitutes itself for faith, liberalism and humanitarianism substitute itself for charity, hope, and obedience, sensualism for chastity and mortification, and socialism for the reign of God in society. We just have this sort of this is really why you get St. Pius X calling something like modernism, which is trying to take naturalism and synthesize with the Christian faith. It's calling it the synthesis of all heresies, because every little aspect of the effects of grace are being given counterfeits, and all of these counterfeits surround the one satanic premise. And the satanic premise is that we will not submit to God and only submit to ourselves. It wants complete autonomy. That's why all of this stuff is so dangerous. That's why all this naturalism stuff is just so deadly, and that's why it's completely wiped out any sort of sliver of rationality, no pun intended, any sliver of rationality within our society, because people are falling for this naturalism junk and not for a proper view of the supernatural order. You have anything to say, Ethan?
No, not really, actually. There's this section in Shaban talking about rationalism that I thought of when you were talking about this. I think I'll read it later, though. I think there's another spot later on. It'll be more fitting when it talks about like the pride of rationalism, basically.
That's so good. So we have a few more as well. So I mentioned some other ones like semi-rationalism, modernism. There's something also called traditionalism. Basically, semi-rationalism. They try to they corrupt the faith by trying to admit that mysteries. But they admit mysteries. They say there's mysteries, okay, and we have to have the assent of faith. But after the fact, our intellects are capable of reaching it. That doesn't work, and that gets condemned.
This is what made me think of Shaban, was because he's writing directly against Hermes and Gunther, who were mentioned, who Garrigou mentions on whatever page that was.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend picking up The Mysteries of Christianity if you're interested at all in looking more at this topic. He shows clearly the synthesis of the mysteries and how they relate to one another, and just uses reason to interconnect them in a very beautiful way, very similar to what Garrigou does in other works too.
Yeah, so that's semi-rationalism. Then we have traditionalism, which is from Lamennais. I've never heard his name pronounced, but Lamennais. He does the same thing with common sense and tradition. This is basically, if you've ever heard of what is that called? Perennialism. You ever heard of perennialism, Ethan?
I've heard the name. I don't know if
perennialism is basically that there is like some sort of shade of God's working in all religions, and it kind of points up there, like everybody is one up in the heavens.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So basically, there's some thinkers who try to replace faith with common sense, and of course, this sort of common sense. Of course, yeah. Sorry, I can speak. I promise. Of course, this common sense ends up leading to indifferentism. That's just how it happens. Sad. And then modernism tried to do the same thing. Basically, they all tried to all of those little errors, little as in like all of those various
offshoots of the bigger error.
Yeah, offshoots of the bigger error, all of those species of the genus, um, all of them tried to find some way how to take rationalism, and ultimately naturalism, and give some sort of little step of Catholicism towards those things. And the magisterium just laid down the law on every single one of them, so you can't hold any of them. You get slapped over the face. So yeah, slapped in the face for holding any of these. And then he has this good quote to finish off the third section in this chapter, and he says, "A virtuous mean does indeed exist between two vices that are opposed by way of excess and defect. However, between truth and falsity, as well as between good and evil, the only mean that exists is mediocrity. That is, the confusion of good and evil, as well as the perversion of the true norm of judgment and of will."
Mm.
So, Catholicism and naturalism are opposed as good and evil, truth and falsehood. So there's no synthesis that could possibly be done. This isn't in a case of opposed errors like pseudo supernaturalism and naturalism. Those are opposed errors that Catholicism is the synthesis of. But between truth and error, there's only just error that just happens to be
Yeah.
closer to the truth. Okay, so the fourth one, and this is one that I think you were talking about, Ethan. So the fourth one is the spirit of rationalism, and this is kind of where we get into the utter perversity, because Garrigou is going to point out, and I got all the little clips from the chapter, but he points out that he says, quote, "Rationalism is an expression of supreme arrogance and the elevation of man above God." It's really really what it is. St. Thomas has this good this really good comment on like what is the sort of sin that is like the root of other sins, in like in the spiritual order. He's going to say it's pride, and the reason that he says it's pride is because pride represents a perversion of end. So it's going to represent us putting ourselves and put ourselves above God, ourselves as end above God as end. So that's what makes pride so deadly. And really, what naturalism is naturalism is this same sort of pride, especially rationalism. Rationalism is the same sort of pride, which is putting the autonomy of our intellects above God. It's above the authority of God speaking. We can also think about, like, in terms of our end, it's putting earthly felicity above the beatitude promised by God. We could go through all of these and see what they're putting above what God has given us, and we could just see the sort of gross perversion. It's worse than like easily. Naturalism is going to be worse than something like Islam. Beatitude for the Muslims, beatitude is something which is carnal, and we would rightly critique that, as Saint Thomas does very well. Rightly critique the carnality of the beatitude of the Muslims, but at least it's it's like some sort of concept of beatitude is coming from God. When it comes to the naturalists, their concept of beatitude is just human felicity. It's just it really just has to do with what man could give, not what God can give. The sort of self-becoming or nonsense that occurs. So this is why we would say that this is why this sort of language is used. And notice, I want to be clear about this, and Garrigou actually makes this clear. When we're critiquing naturalism as having supreme arrogance or perversity or pride or whatever it may be, we're talking about the system itself.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the individuals who are caught up in this system. A lot of times the individuals aren't exactly aware of what they're doing, and I think that's an important distinction to make, and not go out and talk to people and be like, "Hey, you deny the supernatural order? Well, did you know that you're prideful and arrogant and like represent the peak of intellectual pride by denying the authority of God over over your intellect. It's very unhelpful. And not only is it unhelpful, it's untrue, because a lot of the times the people don't understand that that's the sort of end and principle of what they're talking about. Do you have anything to comment on this in general? I wanted to go through the 5 points that he gives.
No, I think you're good on the points in general. Yeah, you're good. I'm judging you from on high again.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, there
Thank
you go.
you. Okay, so he gives 5 points that the church teaches about the spirit of naturalism. So first, he's going to say the encyclicals use the term perversity in accordance with its proper sense, which indeed is most suitable here. For perversity is the intention to invert the essential order of things, namely so that creatures may no longer be subjected to God, but rather God to creatures. In this, we see a spiritual sin that is much graver than carnal sins. Wisdom judges all things in relation to God, the first cause and ultimate end, whereas spiritual foolishness judges all things, even those related to God, relative to that which is the lowest, namely freedom of thought without any rule. So the first aspect of the spirit of naturalism is that it's perverse. And it's perverse because it inverts the essential order of things. Do you have anything to say about that, Ethan?
No, that's what we were talking about earlier. I think it's great. Well, it's great. It's awful. It's the worst thing ever, and that's exactly what we're saying.
That's great.
There's nothing worse than this.
Thank you, Ethan. Ethan's like, oh yeah, that's great. That's great. The perversion of the essential order of things. That's great. That's great.
Fantastic. We love that.
Yeah. Okay. So now the second, he goes on to say, according to the schema of the First Vatican Council, the spirit of rationalism proceeds from a more radical impulse towards perversity. Indeed, Catholic theologians have always discussed the principle of the absolute autonomy of created reason when discussing a graver spiritual sin, namely that of the demons. Rationalism either rejects the supernatural mysteries, as well as our elevation to the supernatural order, or wishes to know that the supernatural mysteries by the natural power of reason. Hence, it is not surprising if, in looking upon the rationalistic principle of the autonomy of nature and of human reason, the Church sees nothing other than spiritual rebellion, whose motto is "I will not serve." So this is what I was saying about the sort of formal principle of the sin of the demons, is that really rationalism is naturalism in general is the sort of sin of the demons brought out to bear in saying, okay, I will not serve. I will follow the sort of beatitude that I want. I'm going to. I actually interesting connection. So my wife was telling me about this. This would be an interesting video to review, to kind of see all of this stuff play out. But you know where they have those videos? I can't remember who does them, where you like have random people from the street come on, and they all sit in a room and they all discuss something, and it's supposed to be like,
Oh yeah,
one of
yeah.
they're always horrible.
They're horrible, terrible.
They're always horrible. So they had this one where they brought in a bunch of people into the room, and they asked the people, "Do you think Satan was the bad guy?" It's fascinating. They said, "Okay, stand up if you think he's the bad guy. No, stand up if you think he's the good guy. Sit down if you think he's the bad guy, or at least not the good guy." And everybody but one decided that they wanted to stand up and say that he was actually the good guy.
What?
So yeah, it's crazy. All of these like women and homosexuals and all those people. So they were all questioned, is like, why the heck do you think like Satan's the good guy? Like what's going on here? And it's fascinating what their answers were. Their answers were basically this. Their answers were, well, why wouldn't we think Satan's the good guy? Satan wanted people to be like freed from the rule of God. They wanted them to be free. They wanted them to have autonomy from God. I mean, they weren't using these exact terms. They were saying basically free, but what they meant by that is that Satan was good because Satan brought about autonomy for man. What is this? This is basically just naturalism.
Yeah.
And these people
Judging
were,
higher things through lower things, as if the
yeah,
lower things are the
yeah,
highest goods and the highest goods are the greatest evils.
yeah. And what was really interesting is they were just being consistent. Because
Yeah.
the other guy in the room kind of was just like, well, um, I know from like my upbringing that like autonomy and freedom and liberation and all of this stuff, that's actually a good thing. So like rights and crap like that, that's good things. So like what am I supposed to do? And the thing is, he had a right intuition. He just had all of the wrong principles from his upbringing to be able to judge this question and to be able to intelligently argue for the conclusion. And what people need to do is people just need to say, like, actually, no, autonomy is not an absolute good. Freedom is not an absolute good. Rights don't exist absolutely. None of these things are like actually just they're not just like things floating out of there like independently of God.
Mhm.
Uh, this is not how it works. So actually, it's like really fascinating by understanding like these philosophical trends. It would have been really interesting if like I don't know somebody like Garrigou who's written about naturalism and understands like the sort of inner workings of how this connects with like the sin of the demons. If somebody would have went in there and had this discussion to explain through to people like actually like this is why this is a terrible thing,
Mhm.
and you've just been like kind of brainwashed by this naturalistic spirit in order to think like this. And this is something that it's it's really interesting because both conservatives and liberals they kind of play this gotcha. Have you noticed this? Play this gotcha game, like the Democrats, the true racists type deal. You ever
Yeah.
notice
Yeah.
that? Yeah, or like actually like Republicans are the like true like feminists or like this is just stupid. I actually think that's the dumb crap that what's the woman running for president? What's her name?
Nikki Haley.
Yeah, some dumb crap that like Nikki Haley would say. You see that really what this actually exposes is that all of these people have the same exact principles. They all have the
Mhm.
same exact principles, and it ends up with the glorification of Satan and the sin of the demons. That's where it ends up. All these people have the same principles. They don't recognize they haven't been properly formed due to the almost complete absence of the genuine Catholic faith being taught in these circles. They just don't recognize that the importance of these things. So because they don't recognize the importance of these things, because they're not like they don't alter their principles to beatitude as their end, because of this, because they have their end in earthly felicity, this is the root of so many things.
Mhm.
This is why people will kind of like hedge their bets and spend most of their time um, like doing all of these sinful acts. I mean, it's like, well, kind of like maybe the supernatural end exists, but I don't really like know that much. I'm not really sure about it. So I kind of just do what I want. This is why because people have just like the natural ends in sight. They don't have the supernatural beatitude in sight. They don't direct all things to that end because they have all of these corrupted principles. They're working it out consistently. That's all they're doing. They're working it out consistently, and they just have like kind of a few different flavors that the way in which they're working it out, depending on things like conditions and um, social influences and whatever. They're just working out the same perversion to different perverse ends. That's all it is. It's just different flavors of sort of perverse principles being worked out. So I actually think that's what all of this is revealing to us about when we're thinking about the various ways that modernity has been corrupted into, and why you can have um, think for example, Joe Biden. Not even thinking about the Republican Party, which it's like we see this collapse as well. But like Joe Biden, while he was president, vice president, while he was vice president, saying that like gay marriage wasn't a thing. That's crazy. That was what, like 10 years ago that he was saying this? Maybe a little bit longer ago that he said this. A little bit longer than 10 years ago. But anyways, it's like the Republicans are doing the same thing. I mean, most of the party is probably like for gay marriage. You have transgenders for Trump. Why do we get such radical shifts in opinion over such like a brief period of time? I mean, it's because by their principles, like sure, you can just make that radical shift. Really, it's just the force of a gutless tradition that's being kept. I mean, according to their principles, I mean, why shouldn't we have transgenders for Trump? Um why shouldn't we have all these things? It's in accordance with like all of their principles. But yeah, the second point, I went a little off track, but this idea of naturalism having a more radical impulse towards perversity. What it's trying to do is it's trying to completely invert God under all things. Under all things. So that's what occurs. So, Ethan, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have probably too many to say, so I'll keep it brief. But there's like when we were talking about, he was talking about freedom a little while ago, and how it's like kind of a freedom from constraints that allows everyone to just kind of do what they wish, and that's why Satan ends up being glorified, like in that example he gave there. Freedom is always like a freedom from something in order to do something. So we're free from the corruption of our natures, for example, when we're given grace in order to seek God and to love Him, right? Which is a much higher good than any good of nature ever could be. And that's something that really needs to be kept in view. By seeing the brightness of the supernatural end, we can see the darkness of nature much more clearly. Not that nature's dark, but it's dark by comparison to our supernatural ends. And I think just reflecting, and this is why contemplation is such an important thing, is that we would reflect on our supernatural end and see that light much more clearly. It becomes clear then how stupid something like rationalism is to glorify nature to the detriment of grace.
Mm-hmm. Where to? Yeah. So there's the third point. He says we must also note that the perversity of the spirit of rationalism is not always immediately apparent, for it is not as much found in the object to which it tends as in its mode of tending towards its object. And this is super important. Actually, just what I was saying earlier. Interesting. It's almost like I read these things already. It proposes to itself a good object, namely social and intellectual project, though without God's aid and without obedience to God. Extremely, extremely important. The mode of progression, the sort of mode, the manner in which somebody does something matters just as much. Actually, it matters more than the good object that they propose. We see this with like I guess you could say the sort of, sometimes you'll get like weird bam, I just perfect. Why does our modern age just render us with abundant examples? The Dodgers thing, the Dodgers thing with the
Yes.
nuns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, that's what was occurring. Is you had people that were saying, "Oh, you have this charitable group of like drag queens that dress like nuns, and they're doing charity and they're doing good stuff, and like Catholics can't get mad at that." And it's like, no, actually, what's important here is, sure, they have a good object, whatever, but the manner in which they're doing it is mocking God. The entire impulse for Catholics, which there were Catholics everywhere, excusing this like blasphemy. The very impulse to excuse this blasphemy was just naturalism. That's what it was. It just showed that they actually think that certain earthly things are more important than offending God. That's ridiculous. It's just naturalism. It's perverse. It's the sin of the demons, really. So furnished with abundant examples of the manner in which people are doing these things. We see this almost everywhere. I'm sure we could bring up a bunch of examples, but I've already ranted on about current events enough.
On that, it was so fitting that the Arizona Diamondbacks, the only team that had a Catholic night, as far as I know, knocked the Dodgers out of the playoffs. And then the Texas Rangers, the only team that actually didn't have a gay pride night, knocked them out in one of the World Series. I mean, it was just like, man, this is awesome.
So based. Love to see it. Okay, and then we get into the controversial bit. He says with the fourth one, nay, rationalism enables gatherings of religions so that all of them may be reconciled. And in these gatherings, all religions are represented except for Catholicism. An apparent good is all the more dangerous to the degree that it resembles the true good. Thus, we have the verification of the expression, the corruption of the best is the worst, namely the corruption of charity and religious faith under the appearance of tolerance and reconciliation of all churches and religions. So right here, what we have is and this is one of the few times that you'll hear me quoting him for theological purposes. But of course, Shia Alex shows up right when I start talking bad about Islam earlier. The one time I use it as an example, Shia Alex shows up. One of my Muslim listeners. But what we have, so yeah, this is what we have. I barely quote this guy for theological purposes, but this is what we have with Lefebvre's, Archbishop Lefebvre, his distinction between true and false ecumenism. So what we have with true ecumenism is true ecumenism. That is the true good, which is being presented before us. And true ecumenism is the ability to use certain means of bringing about Christian unity. True good. It's a true good. But then we have the apparent good, the false good that's presented before us, which is false ecumenism. And with false ecumenism, there's this almost admission of the failings of the Catholic religion, and that we're kind of losing out on something that we need to gain from other religions. And this is why we're all coming together, and we're all going to come together. We're going to tolerate each other. We're not going to say that each other have false religions. None of that nonsense. That's false ecumenism. And I was just reading the other day. Funny that he mentions it. I always providentially read stuff that are like this. But there's something called the empirical way, which is one of the apologetic methods which were developed around the time of the Reformation against the Protestants. It's basically what's said in Vatican I, where Vatican I talks about how the church is a certain motive of credibility, to where people, by consideration of the church, can see the moral miracle that is present within the church, and by gazing upon the Catholic Church, they can come to see that divine revelation is credible. There's a certain author who writes on this, and unfortunately, he's one of the most prolific writers on this. And he says, well, after Vatican II, we basically need to turn the empirical way on its head. And we see this perversion of naturalism present in him too. He says that actually the empirical way isn't about gazing upon the church and from that seeing that divine revelation is credible. No, that's not what it's about. Rather, what it's about us joining and holding hands with the Baptists and the Presbyterians and the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox. And once we gather and hold hands together, we actually make supernatural revelation more credible. There's a certain way in which this is, there's a certain way in which this is true, actually. We can talk about the notes as dynamic, to where we can express Catholicity and holiness in a greater degree, which make it, which show forth the credibility more. But to say that we need to grow into credibility because we lack credibility now, that's a complete inversion that we see here. And that's a false ecumenism. That's a false ecumenism that's occurring. Okay, so continuing, the fifth way, and this is the last way before we go into the division of the systems, which is basically going to wrap up this episode. The fifth way, this perversity is indeed rarely fully self-conscious in men. It's important. This last point's important. It's not really, people usually don't realize this. For the sensual man perceiveth not these things that are of the Spirit of God, nor consequently the infinite gravity of sin, which is an act turning away from God. The gravity is better understood by the blessed angels, who intuitively see the divine essence, than it is by the demons. Likewise, the perversity of rationalism is better understood by theology than it is by rationalism itself. This last point is important for us. Important for us to realize in like our apologetic encounters with the what do you want to put it? Like the unreligious people, I guess is the best way of putting it, the irreligious people. When we encounter them, we have to recognize that actually we know, since we're judging on high, like Ethan is, since we know the causes of things, and since we're able to judge from that perspective, when we look at their implicit systems, we actually know what they're thinking better than they do. They don't often recognize it. The theologian often recognizes the errors of heretics better than the heretics do themselves. So when we're interacting with rationalists, we have to keep that in mind, that often they're just not aware, and they kind of need to be led in such a way as to recognize where their error is coming from and where it's going. That is the principles that they're working off of, and a sort of reductio to the logical consequence of their beliefs. Which, if the consequent is false, then the antecedent is also false if it's a valid sequence. So oftentimes we need to show people, we need to draw them into the conclusion that they actually should be holding to, and from that they'll be like, "Eesh, I don't, I think that's actually bad, and I think that's perverse." That's when you kind of get them thinking. But a lot of times people just literally don't realize this. Okay, so anything to say on all of that, or can we move on to the division of the various systems of rationalism?
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay, so um, as we went over above, when we divide the rationalistic systems, we're dividing that which denies the possibility of supernatural revelation. And from this, they can deny it in two ways, or really kind of three ways. So the first way is from perspective of the object, and from the perspective of the object, that is the that which we're considering object rather than subject, that's us. From the perspective of object, this is going to be what's called pantheistic evolutionism. So first one, pantheistic evolutionism, denial from the perspective of the object, or atheism, technically. And then the second one's the perspective of the knowing subject, so the perspective of us. That's going to be agnosticism. It can either be idealistic or empiricistic, but we're going to talk about that later. And then lastly, deism, which deism is from the perspective of God as an agent. So they say that God is somehow kind of bound by the laws that he's going to bring about. Okay, so I think that's all I want to go into, because the various different forms of rationalism, we're going to be going over them in more detail in each one of their relevant sections. You just need to remember pantheistic evolutionism, agnosticism, and deism. Those are the three forms of rationalism, whether it's the perspective of the object, subject, or God as agent. So anything to say before we wrap this up?
I wanted to read that section from Shaban. I was trying to figure out where to read because it's kind of a longer section, so I'm going to cut a good bit out. But it's just very fitting with what we've been talking about here. Especially if you look at it from the perspective of like the luminosity of the mysteries, how bright they shine. Then you can see how dark rationalism is. It's actually just like the opening pages to chapter 1 in his Mysteries of Christianity. Christianity entered the world as a religion replete with mysteries. It was proclaimed as the mystery of Christ, as the mystery of the kingdom of God, which of course are supernatural things, so that's the thing to keep in mind here. Its ideas and doctrines were unknown, unprecedented. They were to remain inscrutable and unfathomable. The mysterious character of Christianity, which was sufficiently intelligible in its simplest fundamentals, was foolishness to the Gentiles and a stumbling block to the Jews. And since Christianity, in the course of time, never relinquished and could never relinquish this character of mystery without belying its nature, it remained ever a foolishness, a stumbling block to all who, like the Gentiles, looked upon it with unconsecrated eyes, i.e., judging it from lower principles, or like the Jews, encountered it with uncircumcised hearts, that it's not that submitting their hearts to it in childlike faith. After the mystery of Christianity had, in spite of all of this, succeeded in making its way and became firmly entrenched in the belief of the nations, the miraculous conversion of the church, which is a motive of credibility, it found other less malevolent adversaries. Many souls were too noble, quote unquote, to disdain the lofty and beneficent force of Christianity, or too respectful of the faith of their childhood and the heritage of their fathers to turn from it in arrogance, but still not humble enough to surrender themselves to it with childlike trust. They sought to snatch the veil from the sanctuary of Christianity, to cleave the mystery so as to liberate the kernel of truth from the dark prison of its shell and bring it to light. I'm going to skip a certain section. Far from repudiating Christianity or regarding it with suspicious eyes because of its mysteries, we ought to recognize its divine grandeur in these mysteries. So essential to Christianity are its mysteries that, in its character of truth revealed by the Son of God and the Holy Spirit, it would stand convicted of intrinsic contradiction if it brought forward no mysteries. I think that's a huge point. Mysteries are a key part of Christianity, that things are above the nature of human reason, and that's exactly what rationalism denies. Its author would carry with him a poor recommendation for his divinity if he taught us only such truths as, in the last analysis, we could have learned from a mere man, or could have perceived and adequately grasped by our own unaided powers, which rationalism claims we can do, or at least denies that they exist. I would go even further. The truths of Christianity would not stir us as they do, nor would they draw us or hearten us, and they would not be embraced by us with love and joy if they contained no mysteries. What makes many a man recoil from the Christian mysteries as from sinister specters is neither the voice of nature, nor the inner impulse of the heart, nor the yearning for light and truth, but the arrogance of a wanton and overweening pride. When the heart thirsts after truth, when the knowledge of the truth is its purest delight and highest joy, the sublime, the exalted, the extraordinary, the incomprehensible, all exercise an especial attraction. A truth that is easily discovered and quickly grasped can neither enchant nor hold. To enchant and hold us, it must surprise us by its novelty, it must overpower us with its magnificence. Its wealth and profundity must exhibit ever new splendors, ever deeper abysses to the exploring eye. We find but slight stimulation and pleasure in studies whose subject matter is soon exhausted and leaves nothing further for our wonderment. But how powerfully sciences enthrall us when every glance into them suggests new marvels to divine, and every facet of the object imprisons new and greater splendors. And that's really the main thing, is what rationalism denies: the greatest aspect of Christianity, namely all of its mysteries, and how these things are so far above us and that we're called with something infinitely higher than us. It denies all of those and rather decides to have a temporal life which ends in nothingness.
Well, I think that's a good closing point. Thank you, Ethan. We should be back next week to do a much less exciting stream. I think it's on pantheistic evolutionism. Right? Is that the next chapter?
Yeah, it is.
I think we'll. It's going to be. I'm probably going to fall asleep during the episode. I'll have to. I've been carrying for like 3 episodes in a row, Ethan. So
I know. I'm sorry.
it's your job to carry while I sleep.
I'll just strap you on my back this time.
Yes, so true.
I'll do my best.
Carry me up the mountain of learning.
I'm already at the top. It shouldn't be hard. I'll just throw a rope down.
Yeah. So next week, examination, chapter 8, examination of pantheistic evolutionism, in as much as it denies the possibility of supernatural revelation from the perspective of its object, and we'll be discussing. We'll be going over what it is, who's holding to all of this junk, what are the various parts of it, what are the forms of it, and then also how do we refute it by showing that revelation is possible from the part of God. So that's everything. As always, God bless.